Once a promising student of the Jedi Order, Exar Kun's potential was rivaled only by his own staggering arrogance. He was the apprentice of the famed Jedi Battlemaster Vodosiask Boss, and was easily his greatest student in terms of raw skill, though his aggressive nature and fascination with forbidden knowledge motivated him to go renegade in a quest for ancient Sith secrets. In what would become an all-too-common tale, Kun's journey to prove his worth became his first step down the dark path. Tutored by the spirit of the ancient Sith Lord Freedon Nad, Kun fell to the dark side and was anointed Dark Lord of the Sith by a procession of Sith spirits, with the Krath warlord Ulic Qel-Droma named as his foremost apprentice. Exar Kun instigated the Great Sith War, a bloody and devastating campaign which rocked the Jedi Order and corrupted many of the latest generation of Padawans. However, his bid for power was cut short after the betrayal of his apprentice Qel-Droma. With the Jedi closing in, Kun retreated to his base on Yavin 4 and began a Sith ritual, drawing on the life force of his many followers and using the energy to become a Sith spirit. However, Jedi forces led by Nomi Sunrider sensed Kun's intent and managed to prevent his escape by raising a wall of light side energy which surrounded the entire planet. Trapped, Kun's spirit remained dormant on Yavin 4 until the establishment of Luke Skywalker's Jedi Praxium awakened him. When he began terrorizing the establishment, the Jedi fought back, and Kun was finally vanquished. Darth Vader, formerly the Jedi hero Anakin Skywalker, was the Sith apprentice of Darth Sidious, recruited on the eve of the Great Jedi Purge in 19 BBY. Arguably the greatest Jedi killer of all time, Vader spearheaded the sack of the Jedi Temple and butchered the Separatist Council on Mustafar, ending the Clone Wars and helping to usher in the reign of the Galactic Empire. However, he was confronted by his former Jedi Master Obi-Wan Kenobi, and after a lengthy duel throughout the mineral refineries of Mustafar, he was defeated. Left to die in the hellish landscape, Vader suffered severe injuries, necessitating an extensive cybernetic refit to keep him alive. His physical and force-based abilities were severely hampered, the weight of the prosthetics compromising his agility, and the lack of living tissue preventing the force from properly flowing through his body. Despite his disadvantages, Vader adapted quickly, becoming the enforcer of the newly minted Emperor Palpatine. However, Vader was no passive stooge of the Emperor, well aware that his master viewed him as an unfit apprentice and planned to replace him, and on several occasions attempted to train his own apprentice to help him take down Palpatine, finally setting his sights on his son, Luke Skywalker. It was at Luke's hands that Vader finally met his defeat, with Palpatine encouraging the young Jedi to finish the job and replace Vader. However, Luke refused to kill his father, rejecting the dark side of the Force and prompting Palpatine's wrath. Vader stepped in to defend his son, killing Palpatine, but suffering fatal damage to his cybernetics, which resulted in his death. This remake was motivated by a number of factors. Firstly, my understanding of both Exar Kun and Darth Vader has developed a great deal since I made the original video, and there are a lot of elements that I feel need to be better explained, and there are a number of areas where my opinion has changed. Secondly, this is in response to a forum discussion on this very matchup started by ShadowKing on ComicVine. While I found the initial comment by Silver2467 to be an absolutely beautifully conceived argument in Vader's favor, the rest of the forum was nothing more than a big echo chamber. There were no dissenting opinions, no one coming up in Exar Kun's defense, just a whole bunch of people agreeing with and reinforcing this initial comment. The whole point behind forums is for debate, and this wasn't a debate. So consider this video my answer to Silver2467's excellent argument. Exar Kun and Darth Vader, two of the most infamous figures in galactic history and two of the greatest Sith Lords in the history of their order. If these two juggernauts ever met on the battlefield, who would win? While Exar Kun's declaration that he was the greatest swordsman in the galaxy was clearly nothing more than arrogant boasting, he was unquestionably one of the great masters of his era, his track record speaking for itself. While he has been overcome in various other combat situations, Kun has never been defeated in a serious lightsaber duel. Regarded as the finest apprentice of the noted combat instructor Vodosiast Boss by the Old Master himself, Kun is known to have bested Boss in sparring on multiple occasions, and ultimately slew him in combat during the Great Sith War. However, in his emphasis on unconventional weaponry and techniques, Kun wore his master's influence on his sleeves. As noted in the Knights of the Old Republic campaign guide, Exar Kun's chosen martial art was Naiman. Developed in answer to the domineering philosophies of Form 5 lightsaber combat by more conservatively minded Jedi, Naiman answered this extreme with a focus on moderation and balance. A hybridization of all of the previous lightsaber forms in addition to various other combat disciplines, Form 6 was a well-rounded jack-of-all-trades fighting style that was easily learned though difficult to master. In my view, the purpose of Naiman was not to provide its students with a single proven method that they could rely on in all situations, but to provide them with a multitude of options. A Naiman practitioner's greatest asset becomes his ability to negate his adversary's strengths while simultaneously striking out at his weaknesses, adjusting his technique and changing his approach to suit both the needs of the moment and the opponent. And this is exactly how Exar Kun operates. Kun's diverse approach to combat was heavily reinforced by his highly specialized weapon, an archaic dual-phase saber staff. Created by converting his original Jedi lightsaber, the archaic saber staff was distinguished from later models by the shortened haft, which made the weapon a smaller target and allowed it to pass as a standard lightsaber when only a single blade was active. The dual-phase mechanism allowed the wielder to instantly switch back and forth between preset blade length and power settings. Kun's lightsaber was unique in that each blade had multiple individual settings. In addition to the standard meter-long blade, each blade could be set to either a lengthened 1.5 meters or a shortened 0.5 meter, and go back and forth between full and low power, at which point the blade was nothing more than a light-emitting diode. A consistent element in Kun's style, no matter what technique he was employing, was a reliance on speed-based attack flurries and swordplay. His conventional single-blade method was very strength-oriented, with Kun regularly cleaving adversaries in two, though the design of his weapon made such power blows significantly less viable when both blades were active. While the haft could accommodate a two-handed grip, it was best wielded with one hand, making dexterity rather than strength a prime attribute. The original Essential Guide to Weapons and Technology described him as wielding the weapon similarly to a quarterstaff, deflecting strikes with one blade and then spinning the hilt to deliver immediate and devastating counters. Kun backs this up with the inclusion of Trakata-style tactics, using the dual-phase setting to confuse and trick opponents, allowing him to bypass their defenses. There is nothing saying that the dual-phase mechanism can only be employed when both blades are active, which opens the door to more conventional Trakata tactics. He can switch back and forth between the two blades like Warp Null. He can keep both active but set to radically different lengths, etc. And given his tactical sensibilities, these are not things that I would rule out where Exar Kun is concerned, as his approach is based around sudden and radical style changes. It's not just single blade, double blade. Technical and elaborate, Kun's overall style clearly demanded extreme levels of precision and control, and the fact that he was able to meet these demands is an excellent demonstration of his skill. Additionally, Kun is shown incorporating powerful physical strikes into his lightsaber sequences, and has demonstrated his expertise in Jarkai dual blade fencing, using this technique to great effect during his last sparring match with Vodo Boss. In fact, it could be argued that the primary goal behind his style and weapon is to provide the same advantages as Jarkai without the need for an extra lightsaber. While Kun has never been shown incorporating force-based attacks into his lightsaber sequences, it is a core element of the Nyman form, meaning that he is almost certainly familiar with the technique. In my view, this is simply a skill that he has chosen to keep in reserve for when he needs it. As a consummate master of his chosen martial art and possessed of such a broad and unconventional skill set, Exar Kun was an extremely adaptable fighter, well equipped to deal with a wide variety of combat situations, engaging blaster-wielding assailants, engaging multiple opponents, not to mention single combat against opposing lightsaber duelists. As witnessed on multiple occasions, Kun's tactical approach was exceedingly aggressive, based around off-balancing and overwhelming his adversaries, reflecting his disregard for the tenets of moderation and balance at the core of Nyman, and his near-complete abandonment of Jedi philosophy. Kun's goals in battle were to provoke and confront, shock and surprise, become the threat. His approach was clearly intended to simultaneously avoid falling into predictable patterns, while at the same time discerning and exploiting such patterns in the opponent's approach. Due to his arrogance, he didn't really plan ahead, instead allowing the needs of the moment to dictate his responses, relying on flexibility and improvisation to win the day. When unable to achieve results with conventional techniques, he tossed aside the old method and switched fighting styles, changing the rules of the engagement. While he was content to initially rely on a conventional assault with a single blade, he would resort to attacking with his saberstaff if pressed, relying on elaborate attack flurries combined with Trikata tactics to confuse and overwhelm his opponent. Conversely, his defensive approach was based around the concept that a good offense is the best defense. While entirely capable of stonewalling adversaries with deft swordplay, he really isn't capable of weathering an assault as the eye of the storm, and doesn't take physical injury very well. What he can do is effectively change between a variety of offensive skills and approaches to surprise his adversaries. In conclusion, Exar Kun was a very unique swordsman, on the one hand devising radically unorthodox and innovative techniques based around his highly specialized weapon, and on the other hand employing conventional techniques in radically unconventional ways. His primary assets as a fighter were his versatility, his unpredictability, and his sheer bloody ruthlessness. However, Kun was not without his limitations. The vast majority of lightsaber duelists featured throughout the Star Wars franchise have very consistent styles and techniques, essentially able to employ the same proven methods repeatedly to great success. Kun has not been able to accomplish this because he has spread himself so thin. He isn't a true master of any one trick, but he is capable with a large number of them, the Swiss Army knife of lightsaber duelists. Exar Kun is not as good as he thinks he is, and he is not unequaled, but he is unparalleled. Similarly to Kun, Anakin Skywalker was also a natural talent with the lightsaber, developing into one of the most renowned and capable Jedi warriors during the Clone Wars, proving his mastery when he defeated the fallen Jedi Sith Lord Count Dooku, himself regarded as one of the finest duelists in the history of the Jedi Order. With his fall to the dark side and defection to the Sith, these skills would be turned against the Jedi, and though Darth Vader didn't boast Kun's track record, he still established himself as an infamous and experienced Jedi killer. Additionally, as many of the Sith acolytes and Dark Jedi serving the Galactic Empire trained under him, Vader had a significant influence on the development of lightsaber combat during the Dark Times. In fact, it could be argued that this period was the heyday of Form 5 lightsaber combat thanks to him. Form 5 lightsaber combat was developed to address the perceived weaknesses of Form 3, and was built around the tactic of following up defensive maneuvers with immediate counters, retaliating against the opponent rather than passively enduring their assault. The Xian variant of Form 5 was designed with blast deflection in mind, while the Gem So was intended for lightsaber dueling. Anakin Skywalker mastered both, though the Gem So was his first love. Not only did Vader retain this skill, but he proved to be a highly creative fighter who mixed and matched forms, using the Gem So as the backbone for a personalized hybrid style that borrowed elements from all lightsaber forms. During his career as a Sith Lord, much of Vader's skill and effectiveness was ironically due to the injuries he suffered after his defeat on Mustafar, the severe physical handicaps forcing him to completely rebuild his fighting style from the ground up, resulting in a unique and calculated method. Vader's hybrid form was intended to protect the vulnerable components and compensate for his hampered mobility. Refining his footwork, he regained a measure of his old agility, but turned his immobility into an asset, relying on his supreme endurance and strength to carry him through. However, while brute force was one of the defining elements of Darth Vader's fighting style, he was not some barbarian hefting a cudgel. Vader's technique was described as crisp and unpredictable by Oli Starstone on Kashyyyk, and she noted both his precision and economy of motion. Though incapable of quick and nimble acrobatics, Vader was capable of sudden bursts of great speed, and could cover ground quickly with solid power leaps. Despite a seeming lack of polish, Vader's lightsaber technique was exceedingly sophisticated, and its nature was very much at odds with Kun's. Where Exar Kun's versatility was based on a broad array of radically different but highly specialized skills, Vader relied on a consistent but highly flexible style. It should be noted that the speed-oriented aspect of Kun's style would not be enough to overwhelm Vader's defenses, as the most common lightsaber form within the Jedi Order at the time of the Purge was Ataru, making that sort of rapid offensive precisely the sort of thing that Vader has optimized himself to defend against. But conversely, Vader's strength-oriented approach was the sort of style that was very much in vogue during Kun's era, meaning that it's something that he knows how to deal with. On a purely technical level, they possess effective answers to everything that the other is bringing to the table. Additionally, Vader was also an expert in the use of unarmed combat techniques. His effectiveness in this arena was initially the result of his cybernetic augmentation, heavy armor allowing him to shrug off any physical strikes that actually landed, while his prosthetic hands increased the effectiveness of his own attacks, however crude they were. As he trained and developed his method, he eventually devised quite a sophisticated bare-handed fighting method, and became an expert at incorporating such physical strikes and grapples into his lightsaber sequences, though he did so only rarely. Vader was also an expert at incorporating various force-based attacks into his lightsaber sequences. He's employed everything from basic force pushes and shoves to advanced telekinetic throws, pummeling targets with all available loose objects, sometimes while simultaneously attacking them with his lightsaber. Though he did study Nyman as a Jedi, his skills in this area were instead based off of the Dun Mosh tactic. While both of these skills do provide certain practical advantages for Vader, I don't see them as being major game changers, as Kun is versed in both. As I mentioned earlier, while Kun has never been depicted integrating force-based attacks into his lightsaber sequences, It is a technique that he is practically guaranteed to be familiar with, and more than likely has simply chosen to keep in reserve for when he needs it. Physical combat is a little trickier, because Vader has the advantage of his armor and cybernetics, allowing him to withstand and dish out incredible amounts of punishment. And here I will say that he does have a substantial advantage, with Kun's only saving grace being how sparingly Vader employs such techniques. Dun Mosh was the Sith school of psychological warfare and intimidation tactics, based around verbal taunts to expose inner doubts and fears, disrupting an adversary's focus, and the showboating of superior force abilities and lightsaber skills in order to cow targets into submission. This focus on psychological warfare was something that Vader had in common with Kun, though whereas Kun emphasized shock and surprise, Vader was all about fear and intimidation. Vader's tactics were based on the lessons he learned from his failures as Anakin Skywalker. Rather than cutting loose and unleashing a furious, rage-driven offensive barrage, he played it smart, having learned from the examples of both of his teachers. A fight is never a goal in itself. Sometimes it is simply a distraction from the true goal and best countered with a larger distraction. Vader was an expert at the larger distraction end of things, and many of his most successful battles have been deeply rooted psychological manipulations. Terror was a weapon that Vader wielded with practiced ease. However, I don't think that Vader's fear tactics would be successful against Kun. All of the most successful psychological fighters have required an in-depth understanding of the opponent so they know which buttons to push, and Vader was no exception. When lacking such knowledge, Vader can only rely on very general intimidation tactics, something that Kun would not give into because his ego wouldn't allow it. On a more conventional level, Vader was highly skilled at using his environment to seize the tactical advantage, herding adversaries and guiding the fight to a location of his own choice. To his credit, he has proven that he can achieve this both when given the opportunity to plan out engagements and when dropped into fights cold. While Kun has no direct answer to this focus on positional advantage, I don't think that this is a game breaker for him, as he is a down and dirty close quarters fighter who can operate on almost any terrain. On a more technical level, Vader's approach to lightsaber dueling was based around pattern recognition, using his knowledge of the Jedi martial arts against his adversaries. Perhaps the best demonstration of this skill being his duel with Siadam Forte and Iwo Kulka on Kashyyyk, as described in Dark Lord: The Rise of Darth Vader. Time and again, the two Jedi Knights attempted to alter their style, but Vader had an answer for every lunge, parry, and riposte. His style borrowed elements from all techniques of combat, even from the highest, most dangerous levels, and his moves were crisp and unpredictable. In addition, his remarkable foresight allowed him to anticipate Forte's and Kulka's strategies and maneuvers, his blade always one step ahead of theirs, notwithstanding the two-handed grip he employed. However, this emphasis was also the source of one of Vader's primary weaknesses as a fighter. While he is optimized for contests with the great duelists of his era, individuals like Obi-Wan Kenobi, Mace Windu, or Yoda, duelists who relied on advanced and flexible but highly consistent and ultimately quite predictable fighting styles and tactics, he is poorly optimized for contests with duelists who balance their options and change up their methods, adapting to changing circumstances rather than relying on a consistent style. The best example of this was Rowan Shrine, who sussed out Vader's technique and his weaknesses, adjusting his own approach to strike out at these weaknesses. And this is precisely the sort of approach that Exar Kun relies on. One of Kun's primary goals was avoiding predictable patterns and, like Vader, sussing out and exploiting such patterns in his adversary. Vader may have effective answers to everything that Kun is bringing to the table, but his fight with Rowan Shrine was a perfect demonstration of the difficulties he has when confronting someone who relies on Exar Kun's unpredictable approach, and Shrine was only equipped with a standard lightsaber and was only employing standard lightsaber techniques. What really makes a lightsaber duel Kun's game is his specialized weapon reinforcing his style and pushing things to the next level. While Vader also employed a dual-phase lightsaber, his weapon was much more straightforward and simplistic, a heavy-duty lightsaber designed for a strength-oriented fighting style, with the blade lengthening to 1.5 meters to allow him to fight from a distance. So Vader would be hard-pressed to defend against Kun's chameleon offense, as he has so little to work with tactically. Exar Kun gets the edge as a martial artist and lightsaber duelist. Both Exar Kun and Darth Vader were human males, though that is where the similarities ended. Presumably in his mid to late 20s at the time of his physical death, Kun was very well built and demonstrated high levels of strength, agility, and dexterity, attributes that bolstered his development as a martial artist. Vader was 45 years old at the time of his death, and while his original physical attributes as a Jedi were very similar to Kun's, as a Sith Lord he was more machine than man. Many of his internal organs were replaced or supplemented with implants, all of his limbs were prosthetic, and he required a respirator to breathe. However, due to the severity of his condition, his reconstruction was rushed. The prosthetic limbs were badly made, affecting his mobility, and the top-heavy armor threw off his balance, forcing him to completely revise his fighting style to compensate. Kun's own limitations also strongly affected how he developed as a duelist. While capable of dishing out huge amounts of punishment, he was a fragile lightweight who couldn't handle injury very well. Not only did this force him to develop as a purely offensive swordsman, but it also made him extremely reliant on force-based physical augmentation to function effectively, leaving him helpless whenever his connection to the Force was compromised. While Vader's hampered mobility remained a significant weakness, the advantages offered by the cybernetics, at least in a combative sense, more than made up for it. Thanks to his prosthetic limbs, his strength was superhuman, and a constant dose of painkiller and other drugs granted him almost limitless endurance. The armor itself protected him from injury and attack. Darth Vader has been shot, stabbed, torched with a flamethrower, exposed to hard vacuum, even been buried alive, and is still walked away. However, Vader was not without his weaknesses. The armor and cybernetics, while extremely durable, were also extremely sensitive to electrical discharges. Low-level bursts would cause the prosthetics to seize up, while high-energy barrages would completely disable everything, leaving him a helpless quadriplegic. While the redundant mechanisms built into the respirator allowed him to breathe unassisted for a brief time, once it failed, he suffocated. But despite this weakness, Vader was more than capable of physically outperforming almost any adversary, at least in terms of strength and endurance. While I believe that Kun's greater agility and dexterity are not to be discounted, I don't see them as enough to swing things in his favor. Darth Vader gets the physical edge. This examination of their Force abilities is going to be quite unusual for me, in that it will be a direct side-by-side comparison of these two combatants on almost every level. Both Exar Kun and Anakin Skywalker were powerful natural talents who developed rapidly as Jedi, though neither of them truly came into their own as Force wielders until after their fall to the dark side, spending their early years dedicating themselves to a mastery of lightsaber combat. Kun's development was brought about by his tutelage under Freedon Nad and his exposure to and experimentation with ancient Sith techniques and lore. Darth Vader's development was forced by the need to compensate for and overcome his handicaps, his ability to wield the Force crippled by the loss of so much of his living tissue after his cybernetic reconstruction. For all intents and purposes, Vader was Beethoven gone deaf. At the height of his powers, Kun was noted as an infamous Sith sorcerer, meddling with the very fabric of life itself, whereas Vader developed as a terrifying battlefield juggernaut, a symbol of the invincible might of the Galactic Empire. Both were experts in the use of force-based physical augmentation, though their applications were very different. Kun's use of this power was quite conventional, pushing his speed, agility, and strength to superhuman levels and allowing him to operate as a fast-paced battlefield dervish. Vader's application was extensively retooled to compensate for his cumbersome armor and cybernetics. They shared a common emphasis on enhanced reflexes and dexterity, though for very different reasons. Kun relied on this power to meet the intense technical demands of his unique fighting style, whereas Vader used these abilities to develop his precision and timing in order to compensate for his compromised mobility and movement. Additionally, Vader employed force speed in calculated bursts. As augmentation of this sort feeds into martial arts training, this segment will not be figuring into the final conclusion. Again, both were experts in the use of telekinetic attacks, though again their applications were very different. Both employ their powers with psychological warfare in mind, though where Darth Vader was all about making examples of his victims, Exar Kun was all about showboating his powers and focusing all of the attention on himself. Kun was optimized for single combat, lashing out at individual targets with pinpoint precision and overwhelming might. His precision was demonstrated when he slammed Silvar with a force push in the Senate Hall on Coruscant, driving her back without even disturbing the Massassi pikemen standing in front of her. Furthermore, his RPG character sheet in the Knights of the Old Republic campaign guide credits him with Force Wound and Force Whirlwind. Whirlwind involved manipulating the air currents around a target, lifting them off the ground and spinning them rapidly. While not outright lethal, it's easy to see how a target would be completely disabled. Wound was a precise telekinetic strike aimed at the internal organs of an enemy, causing severe injury. While not confirmed, I believe that this was the power that Kun used to kill the ancient Jedi Master Odan Given the levels of power that demonstrated and was credited with, this feat was roughly equivalent to Darth Vader killing Yoda with a Force choke, demonstrating Kun's ability to either penetrate or bypass the telekinetic defenses of even the most powerful Force adepts. Conversely, while Kun has been subjected to telekinetic strikes, the fact that the only individuals to even attempt to use such powers against him were Odan and the Spirit of Freedom Nad, an eminent Jedi Master and a Dark Force entity respectively, suggests that Kun's own telekinetic barriers were so overtly powerful that they served as an effective deterrent against such attacks. While Darth Vader's signature telekinetic power was the Force Choke, it was generally the exception to the rule where he was concerned, the rest of his applications being battlefield-oriented abilities. Broad pushes and waves allowed him to devastate large groups of enemies, and his use of telekinetic throws allowed him to use loose objects, including his own lightsaber, as deadly projectiles. Additionally, he has proven on multiple occasions that he can penetrate the telekinetic barriers of all but the most powerful Force adepts, and those barriers he couldn't penetrate he bypassed with Force Throw, as the barriers only cancelled out telekinetic influence, not momentum. His own barriers have proven effective against all but the most powerful. However, Vader's only real advantage is his superior tactical viability, his use of throws allowing him to use his environment as a weapon. Everywhere else he is outclassed. His ability to strike Kun directly with telekinesis is at the very least in question, while we know for a fact that Kun would be able to lash out at him with relative impunity. Additionally, Vader's tendency to either choke or batter victims into submission rather than killing them outright, means that even if Kun finds himself in Vader's grip, he has a chance to defend and retaliate before he is subdued. By contrast, whenever Kun employs the Force offensively, it is with the clear intent to immediately kill or disable his target, meaning that Vader wouldn't have any similar opportunities. While Force-based telepathic powers would be a non-issue in this contest, as both can effectively guard against such influence, I will be examining them for the sake of completionism. Both were versed in the basic Jedi mind trick, which was used by Jedi to influence weak-willed individuals to do their bidding. As they advanced as Sith Lords, they would develop more advanced and devastating powers. Kun's development was almost purely utilitarian in nature, using it to comprehend unfamiliar alien languages by ripping knowledge of them from the mind of a subject. Vader's growth was much more profound and terrifying. He has communicated with willing subjects over great distances, he has probed the minds of unwilling subjects, even powerful, albeit untrained, Force adepts, and he has even frozen enemies in place before killing them. As I stated, this segment will not be figuring into the conclusion. Though credit where credit is due, Darth Vader is easily the superior telepath. Both possessed some faculty with energy-based powers, though Kun had a significant advantage in this field. Exar Kun is known to have learned how to use Force Lightning. While he has never been depicted using it, I believe that this is simply because he has chosen to keep it in reserve for when he needs it. This is the one power that Vader has no answer for, as his cybernetic limbs prevent him from generating or channeling lightning, and the delicate electronics of his respirator are especially sensitive to such discharges of energy. While the magnitude of Kun's application is unknown, even a low-powered burst would be enough to cause Vader's limbs to seize up, driving him to his knees. But despite this handicap, Vader was no stranger to energy-based powers, having developed some faculty with Tutaminis, which he used to deflect or absorb the energy of blaster bolts. However, not only do Kun's baseline powers in this area outclass Vader's, but his capabilities are pushed to the next level by the Sith talisman he carries. Originally owned by Naga Sadao, Kun's talisman consisted of a paired shoulder pauldron and gauntlet joined by 2 sets of chains. As Exar Kun discovered when he first claimed the amulet on Yavin 4, it functions by amplifying and focusing the rage of its wearer, using this power to generate and unleash terrifying blasts of dark force energy. The blasts could do anything from simply incapacitating a target, rendering him or her unconscious, to causing massive widespread devastation. One of Kun's more notable uses of this power was when he obliterated the spirit of Freedon Nad. There is some uncertainty over whether or not Kun can call on this massive destructive potential on a whim, as the talisman had just been subsumed in a pillar of dark side energy when he first acquired it, possibly charging it. But the problem with this argument is that it is heavily based on one's interpretation of the comic, and it is equally likely that the pillars of energy were created by the talisman itself, not the other way around. For the purposes of this analysis, I am assuming that Exar Kun is commanding the full destructive power of the talisman, but even at its lowest demonstrated level, the blasts are still extremely potent. Even if they didn't kill Vader outright, they would at the very least momentarily disable him. In addition to these various combative powers, Kun was also a powerful Sith sorcerer who has used various Dark Force rituals and experiments to create abominations, torment others, and feed off of life itself to boost his own powers. Similarly, Vader has also demonstrated some aptitude for unconventional powers of this sort. He has also used sorcery to twist life forms, turning a target into a Rakghoul monster, and employing Kinetite, a blast of pure glowing kinetic energy. However, for both combatants, all of these powers were either non-combative utility skills or could only be employed under certain circumstances. Kun couldn't employ Force Drain on a whim. he needed to use a Sith ritual to focus this power. Similarly, Vader has only employed Kinetite while in close proximity to the Kyber crystal, a powerful Force artifact that boosted his powers. For these reasons, neither of their alternative abilities provide any real advantage, though I will say that Kun definitely has a leg up on Vader in that he can use these skills consistently. End of the day, this is essentially a confrontation between a quintessential Sith Inquisitor and a quintessential Sith Warrior, and in this particular instance, the Inquisitor almost certainly comes out on top. Everything that Darth Vader does, Exar Kun does just as well, and then some. Many have been quick to tear Kun down simply because his demonstrations of power have been less overt than Vader's, viewing this as a sign of weakness. But no one is paying attention to either context or to his rate of success. The simple fact of the matter is that whenever someone finds themselves on the receiving end of Exar Kun's powers, they are always killed or subdued instantly, whereas many of Vader's opponents have been able to fight back. Exar Kun gets the edge as a Force wielder. And now, the verdict. Despite all of Exar Kun's advantages, Vader is not helpless. His approach to lightsaber combat may leave him ill-equipped to engage a radically unpredictable foe like Kun, but he is still skilled enough to be able to compete. He may be a less powerful Force wielder, but he has greater tactical viability, using his environment as a weapon, something that Kun fails to do. And Vader's physical advantage allows him to withstand tremendous amounts of punishment, and if he is allowed to bring his strength to bear at any point, then Kun is going down. For all intents and purposes, this is a glass cannon versus a mighty glacier. Oberyn Martell versus Gregor Clegane. Vader may be a far more cunning and sophisticated fighter than a beast like Clegane, but his basic attributes as a fighter are very similar, nigh superhuman levels of strength and endurance bolstered by heavy armor. Kun's parallels with Martell are similar. Neither of them can take a hit, and both would be crushed in a direct contest of strength, but their use of unconventional weapons and tactics allow them to get around this by attacking from unexpected vectors to keep the opponent off guard. To be clear, Exar Kun is not a pure offensive dervish like Sora Bulk, and he is entirely capable of defending himself. The nature of the Nine-Man form is that, while it's not the perfect response for anything, it's an adequate response for everything, meaning that Kun can handle himself just fine in virtually any situation. Don't forget that his basic lightsaber technique was sufficient to allow him to fight on even terms with Ulic Qel-Droma, a Djem So specialist and renowned swordsman in his own right, and Vodo Siosk Boss, a famed Jedi weapon master and Kun's former instructor. His problem was that he didn't have the patience to settle in for the long haul and wage a war of attrition when he can score a quick victory by going for cheap shots. He is a prodigy who has taken shortcuts. However, this approach is exactly the sort of thing that Vader is weak against. Darth Vader is a discerning Jedi hunter who has built his skills and powers specifically to counter conventional Jedi techniques and abilities, taking advantage of how consistent and predictable all Jedi are due to the Order's standardized training methods. The problem is that his very mechanical and archaic approach to combat is exactly the sort of thing that Kun has dedicated himself towards countering and exploiting. By putting so much stock in pattern recognition, Vader ends up falling into his own set of predictable patterns, which is death against this opponent. And when Vader inevitably resorts to his Force abilities to compensate, Kun will respond in kind. Vader's powers are extremely formidable, more than most adepts, Jedi or Sith, can handle, but they are badly suited for combating someone like Exar Kun. The powers of Darth Vader are analogous to roundhouse kicks, dynamic and devastating, but not necessarily intended to be fatal. Kun's powers, on the other hand, are throat punches. Quick, precise, and absolutely lethal. While Vader would waste his time trying to batter Kun into submission as per his usual MO, and would likely get in a couple of good hits, Kun would be trying to kill him outright, whether damaging or disabling his cybernetics with Force Wound, or blasting him with his amulet. Simply put, Exar Kun is more able to adapt to and exploit the weaknesses of his opponent than Darth Vader is, his shock and awe tactics trumping Vader's emphasis on pattern recognition, and his focus and precision trumping Vader's more forceful mechanical approach. To be clear, this is all relative, as these are traits that Vader does possess, but not to the same degree as Kun. I declare Exar Kun the victor.